The familiar dread hit long before the officer reached my window, a cold dread every black person in America knows intimately. Suddenly, the world fractured, and my judicial composure meant nothing against the stark reality of strobing red and blue. The drive home was my decompression chamber, a 45-minute buffer between the world of gavels, robes, and the crushing weight of federal law, and my own quiet world of a comfortable armchair and a waiting cat. The sun was low, painting the oak-lined streets of my neighborhood in hues of gold and orange. I was humming along to some forgotten jazz standard on the radio, my Lexus gliding silently over the smooth asphalt. I was just another woman in just another car on her way home. Then, the world fractured into strobing red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. My stomach did a familiar, sickening lurch. It's a feeling I imagine every black person in America knows intimately. It's a cold dread that has nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with statistics. I pulled over immediately, my hands already moving in a practiced, deliberate sequence. Radio off, interior light on, window down, both hands placed visibly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. I took a deep, centering breath, my judicial composure settling over me like a well-worn robe. The officer who approached my window was young, with a fresh-out-of-the-academy haircut and a jawline that seemed permanently tensed. His name tag read Miller. He tapped on the window frame with a thick knuckle, his eyes scanning the interior of my car before they even met mine. "License and registration, ma'am," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any courtesy. "Of course, officer," I replied, my own voice calm and even. I reached slowly, deliberately for the glove compartment, narrating my actions. "I'm just reaching for my registration now." I handed him the documents, along with my insurance card. As he took them, his eyes darted up to my sun visor. Clipped there was a piece of official-looking paper, a proof of correction form from the DMV. I'd been cited a month ago for a window tint that was apparently 2% too dark, a ridiculous ticky-tack violation. I'd had the tint professionally replaced and the form signed off at a local police station, just as required. Officer Miller's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" he asked, pointing with his pen. "It's a proof of correction form, officer, for a previous citation," I explained. He held up a hand. "Stay right here." He walked back to his cruiser, the static crackle of his radio cutting through the quiet evening air. I waited. 5 minutes turned into 10. Cars passed by, their drivers slowing down to gawk at the scene. The young white cop and the black woman in the nice car. The oldest story in the book. When he finally returned, he had a smirk on his face that set every nerve in my body on edge. He leaned down, getting uncomfortably close to my open window. "Ma'am, I pulled you over for failing to come to a complete stop at that last stop sign," he began. I knew I had. I always do. But I also knew arguing the point was a fool's errand. "I see," I said simply. "But that's not our biggest problem right now," he continued, tapping the documents against his palm. His eyes flicked back up to the visor. "I'm going to need to see that piece of paper you've got clipped up there." I unclipped it and handed it to him. It was a standard state form, complete with the signature of the officer who had verified the correction and an official departmental stamp. It was unimpeachable. Or so I thought. He held it up to the fading light, turning it over in his hands as if it were a strange artifact. He scoffed, a short, sharp burst of derisive air. "This is a nice try, I'll give you that," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The font is almost right. Did you print this at home? Get a buddy at a copy shop to whip it up for you?" I stared at him, my carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "Officer, I can assure you that is an official document issued by the state. You can see the verification stamp from the 12th precinct right there." He laughed, a full, actual laugh. It was the most insulting sound I had ever heard. "Oh, I see a stamp. I also see a very convenient way to get out of a ticket you probably deserved.
Forgery of a government document is a felony, you know, a serious offense. My mind, the one trained to analyze arguments and dissect legal precedent, was racing. This wasn't about a rolling stop or a window tint. This was about him, his assumptions, and the narrative he had written in his head the moment he saw me. He had decided I was a liar, a criminal, and this piece of paper was his proof. "Officer Miller," I said, my voice dropping to the measured, authoritative tone I used in my courtroom, "I would advise you to run the citation number on that form. You will find it is perfectly valid." His smirk widened into a predatory grin. It was the look of a man who held all the cards and was about to enjoy playing them. He thought he had me. He thought he was the smartest person in this interaction. "I don't need to run anything," he said, leaning in so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. He straightened up, his whole posture shifting into something more menacing. "Ma'am, I'm going to give you one chance to come clean and tell me where you got this fake ticket."
My blood ran cold. This was escalating far beyond a simple traffic stop. He wasn't listening to reason, he was on a power trip, and I was just along for the ride. "There is nothing to come clean about," I said, my words like ice. "That document is legitimate." He shook his head slowly, a look of mock pity on his face. "Wrong answer." He reached for his radio, his eyes locked on mine. "Dispatch, I'm with a suspect at Oak and Elm. Possible 470, forgery of a public seal. I'm going to need backup." He clicked the radio off and looked back at me, his hand drifting down to rest on the handle of his sidearm. "Ma'am, please step out of the vehicle. Now." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden chilling silence. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the car, to assert my rights, to demand a supervisor. But I knew better. I knew that in this moment, on this dark street, I was not Judge Alana Hayes of the United States District Court. I was a potential threat, and any sudden movement, any perceived defiance could be interpreted as a prelude to violence. The law I upheld every day felt a million miles away. "Yes, officer," I said, my voice a carefully controlled whisper. I unbuckled my seatbelt with a soft click, opened the door, and swung my legs out onto the pavement. The air was cool against my skin. The flashing lights were disorienting, painting the manicured lawns and stately homes in frantic splashes of red and blue. I rose slowly, keeping my hands open and away from my body, a gesture of universal surrender. "Turn around, place your hands on the hood of the car," Miller commanded. His voice was tight, high on adrenaline and authority. I did as I was told, the cold metal of my own Lexus shocking against my palms. I could feel his presence behind me, hear the rustle of his uniform as he approached. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from my neck to my cheeks. In my courtroom, lawyers stood when I entered. Defendants trembled before my judgment. Here, I was being treated like a common street criminal over a piece of paper he was too arrogant to verify. A second patrol car pulled up then, tires squealing softly as it parked behind Miller's. A larger, older officer got out. He had sergeant stripes on his sleeve and a weary, seen-it-all expression on his face. He walked toward us, his boots crunching on the asphalt. "What have you got, Miller?" the sergeant asked, his voice a low rumble. "Caught this one red-handed, Sarge," Miller said, puffed up with self-importance. He was practically vibrating with excitement. "Pulled her for a rolling stop, but look at this." He held up my proof of correction form. "She tried to pass this off as legit, a felony forgery. It's one of the worst fakes I've ever seen." The sergeant, whose name tag read Davis, took the form and examined it under the beam of his flashlight. He glanced from the paper to the back of my head, then back to the paper.
I remained perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the reflection of the flashing lights in my car's windshield. I could hear them murmuring behind me. My fate was being decided in whispers I couldn't quite make out. "Ma'am," Sergeant Davis said, his voice more measured than Miller's, but still firm. "You understand this is a serious allegation." I took a slow breath before answering, forcing the tremor out of my voice. "Sergeant, my name is Alana Hayes. I have asked Officer Miller repeatedly to simply run the citation number printed on that form. His refusal to perform that basic step of due diligence is what has led to this misunderstanding." Miller snorted. "It's a delaying tactic, Sarge. She's been saying that since I pulled her over. She knows once we get her downtown, the gig is up." Sergeant Davis was silent for a long moment. I could feel his eyes on me, assessing. He was the one in charge now. Miller was a rookie, eager and dumb. Davis was the variable. He could either de-escalate this or let it spiral completely out of control. "All right," Davis said finally, a note of decision in his tone. "Let's see some identification. Your driver's license is in your purse?" "It's in my briefcase on the passenger seat," I said. "Miller, retrieve the briefcase. Carefully." I heard my car door open. Miller leaned in, his movements clumsy and loud. A moment later, he emerged holding my leather briefcase, the one I carried into the federal courthouse every single morning. He placed it on the hood of the car with a thud. "Go ahead and open it, ma'am," Davis instructed. I turned slowly, my movements still telegraphed and cautious. I reached out and clicked the two brass latches. Inside lay my wallet, a legal pad, a folder thick with case briefs, and tucked into a side pocket, my other form of identification, the one I used to get through courthouse security. "My wallet is right on top," I said, gesturing toward it. But Miller wasn't looking at my wallet. His eyes, full of suspicion and a hunter's glee, were scanning the entire contents. He was looking for contraband, for anything that would validate his grand theory of my criminality. His hand brushed past my wallet and landed on the hard plastic ID card in the side pocket. He pulled it out, assuming, I suppose, that it was some kind of fake Police Benevolence Association card, another piece of a grand deception.
He held it up to the light. His smug expression didn't just fade, it evaporated. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. His eyes, wide with a dawning horror, darted from the small plastic card in his hand back to my face. The world seemed to slow down. The blare of a distant siren, the hum of his car's engine, the chirping of crickets, it all went quiet. Sergeant Davis, noticing the sudden, tense silence from his rookie, took a step closer. "Miller? What is it? What did you find?" But Officer Miller couldn't answer. He just stood there, frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. He stared at the card, then at me, then back at the card, as if he couldn't reconcile the two realities. He was staring at the 5 words printed in bold, official font directly beneath my photograph. United States Federal Judge. Sergeant Davis, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, snatched the ID from Miller's limp fingers. He held it close to his face, his flashlight beam pinning it like a specimen. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the crackle of the police radio, an indifferent narrator to the implosion of Officer Miller's career. Davis's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. He looked at me, his eyes wide and scanning my face as if seeing me for the first time. He wasn't looking at a suspect anymore. He was looking at a person who could, with a single phone call, make his entire department's life a living hell. "Ma'am? Judge?" Davis stammered, the words catching in his throat. He cleared it, a rough, gravelly sound. "Judge Hayes, there appears to have been a significant misunderstanding." He shot a look at Miller, a glare so hot I thought it might actually leave a burn mark. Miller flinched, his bravado completely gone, replaced by the panicked look of a cornered animal. "A misunderstanding?"
I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. I let the words hang in the air, allowing the full weight of their inadequacy to sink in. I stepped away from the car, straightening my jacket, reclaiming my space, my authority. The balance of power had just shifted so seismically that the ground beneath us might as well have cracked open. Officer Miller accused me of a felony. He was preparing to arrest me. He refused to verify a legitimate document and instead chose to believe I was a forger. That's a bit more than a misunderstanding, Sergeant. Davis swallowed hard. He was backpedaling so fast he was practically running. Miller is a new officer, Judge. He made a rookie mistake, a very, very serious one. He turned to Miller, his voice dropping to a furious hiss. Did you run the citation number like she asked? Miller just shook his head, looking at the pavement as if it held the answers to all his problems. Did you run her license plate? Davis pressed. Another mute shake of the head. So you based this entire felony stop on what? A gut feeling? Davis's voice was laced with pure, unadulterated fury. You decided this woman, this federal judge, was a liar and a criminal based on nothing but your own prejudice? The word hung in the air. Prejudice. He said it. He named the ugly, unspoken truth of the entire encounter. Miller finally looked up, his face a mess of confusion and terror. Sarge, I didn't know. That's the whole damn point, Davis exploded. You're not supposed to know. You're supposed to verify. You're supposed to do your job. You don't pull someone over, see a black woman in a luxury car, and just assume she's up to no good. I held up a hand, and both men fell instantly silent. The courtroom command was an instinct I didn't even have to think about. Sergeant Davis, I said, my tone as cold and sharp as chipped ice. While I appreciate your clarification, the damage is done. Your officer didn't just make a procedural error. He engaged in what could be considered profiling. He threatened me with a felony arrest under false pretenses. He created a situation that was not only humiliating but potentially dangerous. I took a deliberate step toward Officer Miller. He recoiled slightly, his eyes still wide with fear. I looked directly at him. You didn't see a citizen, Officer Miller, I said, my voice low and cutting. You saw a stereotype. You saw what you expected to see, and you let your biases override your training, your protocol, and your common sense. You had every tool at your disposal to discover the truth in less than 60 seconds. A radio, a computer, but you chose not to use them. Tell me, officer, how many other people have you done this to? How many people who didn't have a judicial ID in their briefcase have had their lives turned upside down because of your gut feeling? He couldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at my feet, his face ashen. The flashing light seemed to mock the gravity of the moment, a cheap disco effect for a career-ending drama. Davis swallowed hard. He was shuffling backwards so fast he was practically running. Miller is a new officer, Judge. He made a rookie mistake, a very, very serious one. He turned to Miller, his voice dropping to a furious hiss. Did you run the citation number like she asked? Miller just shook his head, looking at the pavement as if it held the answers to all his problems. Did you run her license plate? Davis pressed. Another mute shake of the head. So you base this entire felony stop on what? A gut feeling? Davis's voice was laced with pure, unadulterated fury. You decided this woman, this federal judge, was a liar and a criminal based on nothing but your own prejudice? The word hung in the air. Prejudice. He said it. Miller finally looked up, his face a mess of confusion and terror. Sarge, I didn't know. That's the whole damn point, Davis exploded. You're not supposed to know. You're supposed to verify. You're supposed to do your job. You don't pull someone over, see a black woman in a luxury car, and just assume she's up to no good. I held up a hand, and both men fell instantly silent. The courtroom command was an instinct I didn't even have to think about. "Sergeant Davis," I said, my tone as cold and sharp as chipped ice. "While I appreciate your clarification, the damage is done. Your officer didn't just make a procedural error. He engaged in what could be considered profiling. He threatened me with a felony arrest under false pretenses. He created a situation that was not only humiliating, but potentially dangerous." I took a deliberate step toward Officer Miller. He recoiled slightly, his eyes still wide with fear. I looked directly at him. "You didn't see a citizen, Officer Miller," I said, my voice low and cutting. "You saw a stereotype. You saw what you expected to see, and you let your biases override your training, your protocol, and your common sense. You had every tool at your disposal to discover the truth in less than 60 seconds. A radio, a computer. But you chose not to use them. You preferred your own narrative. Tell me, officer, how many other people have you done this to? How many people who didn't have a judicial ID in their briefcase have had their lives turned upside down because of your gut feeling?" He couldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at my feet, his face ashen. The flashing light seemed to mock the gravity of the moment, a cheap disco effect for a career-ending drama. Davis swallowed hard. He was stepping between us, trying to mitigate the disaster. "Officer Miller will be disciplined. I will personally see to it." "Internally," I said, turning my attention back to him. "This isn't about just one officer's mistake anymore. This is about a systemic failure. His badge gave him the power to do this. Your department gave him that badge. You are responsible for his actions."
I reached into my briefcase, pulled out my wallet, and retrieved a business card. I handed it to Sergeant Davis. He took it like it was a holy relic. "I expect a call from your chief of police within the hour," I said, "and I will be filing a formal complaint with the Civilian Oversight Board first thing in the morning. I will also be speaking with the district attorney's office about Officer Miller's conduct." Every word was a nail in the coffin of Miller's career. Davis nodded, his expression grim. He knew I wasn't making idle threats. "Yes, Judge, of course, Judge," he mumbled. He stuffed my card into his pocket and gestured for Miller to step away. "Go wait in your car. Don't talk to anyone. Don't even breathe too loud." Miller practically scurried away, a disgraced child sent to his room. Davis turned back to me, his face etched with apology and exhaustion. "Judge Hayes, on behalf of the department, I am profoundly sorry for this. Is there anything at all I can do for you right now?" I looked past him, down the quiet, tree-lined street. My home was 3 blocks away, my sanctuary. But the peace of it felt shattered. This incident wouldn't just disappear when I closed my front door. It would linger. It was a stark, brutal reminder that no matter how high I climbed, no matter what title I earned, to some people, I would always just be a black woman in a nice car, presumed guilty until proven otherwise. "You can answer one question for me, Sergeant," I said, my voice heavy. "If I hadn't been a judge, what would have happened to me tonight?" His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of raw, uncomfortable honesty. He couldn't bring himself to say it, but we both knew the answer. I would have been handcuffed. I would have been put in the back of that patrol car. I would be downtown right now, in a holding cell, waiting for a chance to prove my innocence against the word of a police officer. My life would have been irrevocably altered. He cleared his throat, unable to form a response. "That's what I thought," I said softly. I got back into my car and closed the door, the solid thud sealing me away from them. I started the engine.
As I pulled away from the curb, leaving the two officers standing in the strobing, defeated glow of their flashing lights, my phone buzzed in the center console. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. I answered it, putting it on speaker. "This is Judge Hayes." "Judge, this is Chief Williams," a panicked voice said on the other end. "Sergeant Davis just patched me through. I am so unbelievably sorry. I am on my way to your location right now. Please tell me what I can do to make this right." I took a deep breath, the adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I knew exactly what he could do. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the people who couldn't produce a get-out-of-jail-free card. "Chief," I said, my voice steady and unwavering, "I appreciate the call, but what you need to do isn't for me. You need to pull the body cam footage from both of your officers, immediately, before it has a chance to disappear." There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. The chief had likely expected me to demand a private apology, perhaps a donation to a charity of his choice. He had not expected me to demand the primary evidence for a civil rights lawsuit. The body cam, Judge," Chief Williams stammered. "Of course, consider it done. It will be secured and preserved immediately. I give you my word." "Your word is a start, Chief," I replied, turning onto my street. The familiar sight of my house, the warm lights glowing in the windows, offered a small measure of comfort. But this situation requires more than words. It requires transparent, decisive action. Officer Miller's behavior tonight was not just unprofessional. It was a clear-cut case of biased policing. It was an abuse of power.
I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine, the silence in my garage suddenly profound. "I want that footage, and I want a meeting, tomorrow morning. You, me, and a representative from the city attorney's office. And I want Officer Miller's complete service record, including any and all prior complaints, on my desk, well, metaphorically speaking, by the time we meet." "Yes, Judge, absolutely," the chief said, his voice a mixture of capitulation and sheer panic. He knew this was a storm he could not weather with empty platitudes. He was dealing with a federal judge who had just been personally subjected to the very misconduct his department was supposed to prevent. The next morning, the meeting was tense. Chief Williams and a frazzled-looking city attorney sat across a large conference table from me. I had declined to meet at the police station or city hall, instead insisting on the neutral ground of a conference room in the federal courthouse. My territory. The power dynamic had been established before a single word was spoken. On the table between us was a tablet queued up with the body cam footage. We watched it together in grim silence. First, Miller's perspective. The smug condescension in his voice, his immediate dismissal of my explanation, the glee with which he escalated the situation. Then we watched Sergeant Davis's footage. His initial weary approach, his dawning realization of Miller's monumental screw-up, and the raw, unvarnished fury in his voice when he laid into his rookie. It was all there, just as I remembered it, but seeing it play out from their perspective was even more damning. Miller hadn't just made a mistake, he had been on a mission, fueled by an ugly assumption. When the video ended, I let the silence hang in the air. "As you can see," I began, my voice calm and deliberate, "this was not a simple traffic stop. This was an officer operating on the assumption of guilt based on visual cues, my race and my vehicle. He ignored procedure, refused to de-escalate, and sought to intimidate and criminalize me for a non-existent offense." The city attorney, a man named Peterson, cleared his throat. "Judge Hayes, on behalf of the city, we are prepared to offer our sincerest apologies. And of course, Officer Miller has been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation." "An investigation whose findings will be what, Mr. Peterson?" I countered. "A recommendation for additional training? A slap on the wrist? This isn't Miller's first complaint, is it?" I watched as the chief and Peterson exchanged a nervous glance.
I already knew the answer. My own clerks, the best legal minds in the state, had done a preliminary public records search last night. I have here, I said, sliding a thin folder across the table, records of 3 prior complaints against Officer Miller in his 18 months on the force, all for overly aggressive traffic stops, all involving minority drivers, all of them dismissed internally for insufficient evidence. It seems the only thing different about my stop was that I had sufficient evidence of my station in life to make the charge stick. This isn't one bad apple, gentlemen. This is a rotten barrel. The chief's face fell. He knew he was caught. "What is it you want, Judge?" he asked, his voice resigned. "Want?" I leaned forward. "I want accountability. Not just for me, but for every single person who has been in my position without the benefit of a judicial title. I want Officer Miller terminated, not suspended, not retrained, fired. His presence on your force is a liability and an injustice." Peterson started to speak, likely to explain the intricacies of the police union contract, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Furthermore," I continued, "I want the department to institute a mandatory, independently run biased policing course for every single officer, starting with command staff. And I want the data from all traffic stops, broken down by race of the driver, reason for the stop, and outcome, to be made public on a quarterly basis. Transparency is the only disinfectant for this kind of sickness." It was a bold set of demands. I was using the full weight of my position and the leverage of a potentially explosive lawsuit to force systemic change. I wasn't just Judge Hayes who had been wronged. I was representing every person Miller had bullied and every person who would come after him. The negotiation took hours, but in the end, they agreed. They had no choice. The body cam footage was a smoking gun, and my testimony would be unshakable. Going to court would be a public relations nightmare that the city could not afford. A week later, I received official confirmation that Officer Miller's employment had been terminated. The department announced the new transparency initiative and the mandatory training program in a press release. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. It was a crack in the wall of silence. The drive home that evening felt different. The setting sun painted the streets in the same golden hues, but I felt a sense of profound, weary satisfaction. My run-in with Officer Miller had been infuriating and terrifying, but it had also become a catalyst. I hadn't sought the fight, but when it came to my door, I used my power not just to save myself, but to build a slightly better, slightly fairer system for those who would come after me. I pulled into my driveway, the memory of the flashing lights no longer a specter of fear, but a reminder of a battle won. I had judged, not from the bench, but from the side of a darkened road, and in the end, justice, in its own small way, had been served.